I think that that's a very, very good news to hear. So effectively what he's saying is that going forward, the procurement of consultants will be more on a panel basis. Yeah. So you will procure the consultants in one go and then you appoint them on a project-specific basis. Therefore, you short-circuit the current time that's taken. Yeah. Excellent. That's a great news for private sector as well. So if I may come back to you, Dr. Dana, you also is the founder and head of the Majelis Transportasi Indonesia, the Indonesian Transport Association. And I understand through your saatnya didengar, one of the highest
it's time to be heard.
Time to be heard. One of the highest sector that they picked as needs urgent addressing by the government, by the young people, is transport, right?
Yes.
So do you see beyond the airports that we discussed and beyond the MRT that's currently under construction, do you see any other sectors that the government should be focusing on right now?
Well, I mean, obviously, transport in both regional transport and urban transport is two subsectors that are interested much by the younger generation. But what we also find out is that people more and more young generation are concerned with the water and sanitations, which is also a quite interesting phenomena, not only in the big cities, but we also did a survey outside Jakarta and outside Java, which comes to our mind that I think both transport and water is the sector that I think government should be focusing on. We are also very surprised that energy is less of an interest of the young generations because they probably take it for granted. I mean, we did a survey mostly from the urban young generation, but they don't really care about where the energy is coming from. This year we will take a survey, a more nationwide survey outside Java. So I hope that we can have a better understanding about what the young generation is trying to push the governments on, what sectors they would think that it's going to be essential for future development of this country.
Atif, if I can come to you, one of the recent initiatives that the government is exploring, particularly through the Ministry of State-owned Enterprises,
right,
is to create stronger and larger state-owned enterprises by amalgamating like businesses. So, for example, in the toll road and construction sector, government plans to merge 7 companies into one. In the banking sector, they're again looking at merging 6 or 7 into one larger bank. Based on your experience, particularly you looked at some of the mega projects in China, etc., which has predominantly been delivered by solid, strong state-owned enterprises. Do you see that as a step in the right direction, and any advice that you can give the government of Indonesia?
So I think, as you probably saw with the discussion we had regarding private and public sector, I think, again, accountabilities is the more important issue rather than whether it's state-owned enterprise or not. So, if we're realistic, state-owned enterprises can perform incredibly well. So the world's most profitable and well-run port is Rotterdam in Singapore, both owned by a state-owned enterprise, very well managed. Similarly, property developers like Nakheel in Dubai, etc., have done incredibly well as state-owned enterprises. I think scale does matter. A lot of state-owned enterprises with bigger balance sheets are able to do things that enterprises with smaller balance sheets cannot do. So having said that, that suggests the government's policy is in the right direction. My word of caution would be that it is harder to change the culture of that many institutions in order to create something that's really dynamic. Institutions have a tendency to keep being stuck in their good old habits. One thing that they did particularly well in China was to create a market for dynamic young people to enter into their state-owned enterprises and get jobs with real responsibility very early on in their careers. And particularly people over 65. I mean, China is particularly difficult because there was no retirement age. They were encouraged to take on more of an advisory role with the state-owned enterprises rather than carry on delivering the projects. I think a final innovation is to, instead of merging the 7 banks, for example, into one bank, create a new, very modern bank, and then figure out what bits of the 7 banks should go into this modern bank. And then just simply scrap the bits that should not go in there. And that creates a filter by which you don't need to bring the bad habits of the 7 old banks into the new institution. You can just cherry pick their good habits and put them together. Because the IT systems they'll need, the people processes they'll need will be quite different from what they've been doing in the past.
Thank you. Nick, when you mentioned earlier about digitizing as one of the innovative ways to manage things. In your experience, in terms of transforming larger corporations, whether state-owned or government, how has digitization helped?
Not nearly as much as it should have done, I think is the answer. I think the exciting thing about digital technology is the scope for change going forward. I think in the delivery of infrastructure projects, just the use of digital data to date, as I was describing, has made quite a significant impact. But I think if you look going forward, this is where it really does get exciting. And I think the message that I think we will increasingly see in all forms of life is the fact that not should you be using digital technology, it's if you're not using digital technology, you're not doing your job properly. And you're lagging. And one of the challenges that we have in the infrastructure space is that we are not very good at embracing new technology. So this, in many ways, is actually the opportunity now to really take a huge step forward. So if you look at, interesting example might be one that is actually just being used in place now is the use of sensors. The ability of using sensors in terms of understanding the degradation of infrastructure means that you can make operating savings. And one of the things we haven't actually touched on today is the fact that post-construction, we've talked a lot about construction costs. Construction is actually, over the life of a project, it's only about 35%. So the majority of the cost of a project is through its operating phase. But through sensors, you can manage costs of assets and reduce them by up to about 20-30% because you're just not doing routine maintenance because you don't need to do it. You only put maintenance in there when it's required to be done, which is what sensors do. It's like capacity on rail. If you use digital technology to deliver the signaling of rail, you can actually, it's been proven, increase the capacity by 20%. You think about the amount of capital investment that would save by not having to do it, it's extraordinary. You then look at the use of things like drones, wearables, and these types of capabilities in terms of managing the construction and the operation of infrastructure. It's really quite exciting, again, the savings you can make. You then look at blockchain. Now, blockchain is one of these concepts that a lot of people talk about. I think quite a few people really understand, if I'm honest with you. But if you look at the opportunity for blockchain in the delivery of the supply chain, not just of infrastructure, but everything, but in particular infrastructure, there's great opportunity there. Use of artificial intelligence as well. So there's a whole range of applicability of digital and modern technology to the delivery of infrastructure as well as broader organizational change. But if we don't get at least on the curve, we should get in front of the curve, but if we don't get on the curve, we're being left behind. And my very final point is, one of the, I think, huge benefits that an emerging economy has as opposed to a mature economy is that you don't have people like us old guys saying, this is the way we've always done it. You've got a much more creative approach to doing, accepting approach of doing things differently. And in an emerging economy, I think the opportunity for using new technology is so much greater than in a sort of old-style, mature economy that we see in the European and North American type environment.
Excellent. With that, I open to the floor. Any questions to the panel members? Anyone? Particularly the young ones who, as Nick says, you stand as our future in terms of delivering the innovations for delivering infrastructure. Any questions? Yes. At the front. If you could stand up, they can't see you. Yeah.
My question to Professor Danau, you mentioned about the importance of the transportation, infrastructure around transportation. So I think we should remember when Pak Jokowi was running for the presidency, actually he promised for 7% GDP growth. Unfortunately, to hit the 7% GDP growth, we need the supply of electricity. And now actually the issue, one of the biggest issues in the infrastructure is that supply of a supply much less as compared to the demand. Hence, according to some experts, we need to sort of sort this issue first with electricity, that we can help this country to grow to 7%. Without that, some say that not possible. So, which one is more important according to you? Is it in transportation or this electricity? My question to Professor Atif, you mentioned that, yeah, to minimize risk, then rather than to go with mega projects, then build it step by step, yeah, and then as you learn, then you grow. However, that's a context, but however, if you are just like, if the government have this project, and we as a people, let's give an example, Indonesia, we don't have time basically. We have no patience for you to do all of this, because meaning that you need more time and you delay, and the impact will be to the economy of Indonesia. My question, do you think it's possible, rather than to go step by step, you go and take risk, meaning that you go, as you mentioned, that there are some companies outside Indonesia, they have the capability. You go with them, bring them here, and go with this, with the mega projects, and as you go along, you transfer the knowledge to other projects. So, what are your views on this? Thanks.
Thank you, Pak. You are giving me quite difficult questions for me as a transport expert. So, but when it comes to the selections between transport and energy, I think this country is actually we don't have a luxury to choose, Pak. That is the fact. Because, for example, the Jakarta MRT that we see today being built has been planned 24 years ago. So I think it's not a question of which comes first. I think we have to do both at the same time. So this is the real challenge for us. I think another challenge that we have today is that when you look at the economic growth of 7%, I think it is not going to achieve. We need more growth than that. And I think as a transport expert, I see my sector is the one that actually addresses two big issues in this country development. The first is the economic growth, and secondly, the reducing the inflations. We need both an instrument that address both policy objective of developments, and I see that transport has been able to, or will be able to answer to that questions. Secondly, in the energy sector, I think what we actually need is not as much as the size of energy, and I think the distribution of energy, it matters. Because if we increase the accessibility of people in Sumatra, for example, with inadequate energy, I think there will no hope that they will grow. and they will develop. And we increase the accessibility to people in Papua with inadequate supply of energy. I think is no hope that they can also contribute to their economic development. So I think both are complementary to each other. And again, I think the big issue today is that we don't have any luxury to choose between those two sectors. We have to do it both at the same time, at the same pace.